In the world of sports, there are stories of triumph, tales of underdogs who achieve the impossible, and legends whose careers become the stuff of history. But there are other stories, too. Quieter, more haunting stories that exist in the shadows of what could have been. They are the stories of immense, almost limitless potential, extinguished in a heartbeat, leaving behind only the ghost of a future that was never realized. This is one of those stories. It's about a young man who was built like a freight train, but was said to have the hands of a surgeon. A boy from a small town in northern Minnesota who was so prodigiously talented, so physically dominant, that professional hockey scouts spoke his name in hushed, reverent tones. In the summer of 1986, he stood on the floor of the Montreal Forum, put on the jersey of an NHL team, and embodied the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. He was on top of the world. Just 10 weeks later, that world came to a sudden, violent end on a dark stretch of highway. This is the story of George Pelawa, the superstar the NHL never got to meet. To understand the legend of George Pelawa, you have to understand the place and time that created him. He was a product of the mid-1980s, a specific era in both American culture and the sport of hockey. And more than anything, he was a product of Minnesota. Not just the state, but the idea of it, the state of hockey. In the 1980s, Minnesota high school hockey wasn't just a sport. It was a cultural institution, a religion with its own cathedrals of ice, and a season that culminated in the legendary state high school hockey tournament. It was a spectacle that captivated the entire state, turning teenage boys into local heroes. In small towns across the North Star State, from the Iron Range to the Southern Prairies, life revolved around the local rink. This was the world that George Pelawa grew up in, a world where hockey was woven into the very fabric of identity. The NHL of the 1980s was also a different beast than the game we see today. It was a league defined by dynasties like the Edmonton Oilers and the New York Islanders, but it was also an era of brutal physicality. This was the age of the enforcer, the grinder, the tough guy. Teams needed more than just skill. They needed intimidation. Players were bigger, the rules were looser, and the battles in the corners and in front of the net were ferocious. It was in this environment that a new type of player was becoming the most coveted asset in hockey, the power forward. A power forward wasn't just a goal scorer, and he wasn't just a tough guy. He was a rare, almost mythical combination of both. He was a player with the size and strength to dominate physically, to win puck battles, and to create space for his teammates, but who also possessed the soft hands, the scoring touch, and the hockey sense of an elite offensive talent. Think of players like Clark Gillies of the Islanders or Cam Neely of the Bruins. They were the players who could change the course of a game with a goal, a big hit, or a fight. They were the future of the league, and every general manager in the NHL was desperately searching for the next one. It was into this exact moment, in the heart of hockey country, that a young man who seemed genetically engineered for the role was about to make his name known. George Samuel Pelawa was born on February 22, 1968, in Bemidji, Minnesota. Bemidji is a quintessential northern Minnesota town, nestled among pine forests and lakes, best known as the first city on the Mississippi, and the home of the legendary statues of Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. It was a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, and local sports heroes were revered. From a very young age, it was clear that George was a special kind of athlete. He wasn't just good at hockey, he was good at everything. He was a formidable linebacker in football and a powerful slugger in baseball, but the ice was his true calling. He was a natural, blessed with a combination of size and grace that seemed almost unfair. By the time he was a teenager, he was already a man among boys. While his peers were still growing into their lanky frames, George was a solid block of muscle and power. He enrolled at Bemidji High School and immediately became the cornerstone of their hockey team, the Bemidji Lumberjacks. Playing for the Lumberjacks wasn't just an extracurricular activity. It was a matter of civic pride, and George Pelawa gave the people of Bemidji a lot to be proud of. In his sophomore year, he was already a dominant force. By his junior year, he was a legend. In that 1984-85 season, he scored an astonishing 39 goals in just 22 games, leading the Lumberjacks to the state tournament for the first time in 9 years. It was during this time that the hockey world outside of northern Minnesota started to take notice. NHL scouts began making the long trek up to Bemidji, braving the cold winters to get a look at this phenom. What they saw left them speechless. He was already close to his full-grown size, 6'3" and a thickly muscled 240 pounds. He was a punishing body checker who could knock opponents off their feet with startling ease. But what set him apart, what made the scouts' jaws drop, was what he could do with the puck. He had a blistering shot, incredible stick-handling skills for a man his size, and a surprising burst of speed. He was the complete package, the mythical power forward in the flesh. The comparisons started to fly. Scouts saw flashes of NHL greats in his game. Jack Button, the Washington Capitals director of player personnel at the time, famously said, "There is no one to compare him to. He's a unique specimen." After his spectacular junior year, George faced a critical decision. He was so highly touted that he was offered the chance to leave high school and play for the Portland Winterhawks of the Western Hockey League, a major junior league in Canada that was a direct pipeline to the NHL. It was the faster track, the professional path. Many top prospects would have jumped at the chance, but George made a choice that spoke volumes about his character. He chose to stay home. He wanted to play his senior year with his friends, to wear the green and white of the Bemidji Lumberjacks one last time, and to try and win a state championship for his hometown. It was a decision rooted in loyalty and a love for his community. His senior year was a media circus. Scouts from nearly every NHL team were regulars at the Bemidji Ice Arena. Newspapers ran features on him. He was under an immense microscope, carrying the hopes of his town and the weight of sky-high professional expectations on his broad shoulders. He handled the pressure with a quiet grace, leading his team once again with 32 goals in 24 games. Though the Lumberjacks fell short of the state title, George had cemented his status. He was projected to be a top 5 pick in the upcoming 1986 NHL entry draft. On June 21, 1986, George Pelawa, accompanied by his family, sat in the stands of the Montreal Forum. The draft was the culmination of everything he had worked for. The Calgary Flames, a team that had just come off a stunning run to the Stanley Cup Finals, held the 16th overall pick. They had a team built on skill and speed, with stars like Lanny McDonald and Joe Nieuwendyk. But they lacked a dominant physical presence, a true power forward. As the draft unfolded, they watched in disbelief as player after player was taken, and George Pelawa, the player they coveted most, was still available. When their turn came, the Flames general manager, Cliff Fletcher, practically sprinted to the podium. He announced the selection, from Bemidji High School, George Pelawa. The Flames staff were ecstatic. They believed they had just drafted the cornerstone of their franchise for the next decade, the missing piece that would push them over the top to a Stanley Cup victory. For George, it was the dream realized. The kid from a small Minnesota town was now the property of one of the best teams in the NHL. The future seemed limitless, a bright, shining path stretching out before him. To understand the emotional impact of George Pelawa's story, you have to look past the stats and the scouting reports and see the person his friends and family knew. On the ice, he was an intimidating force of nature, a player who inspired fear in his opponents. Off the ice, he was the complete opposite. He was known as a gentle giant, a quiet, humble, and good-natured young man who was fiercely loyal to his friends and family. His high school coach, Tom Serratore, remembered a player who, despite his immense talent, was completely ego-free and coachable. He was a horse, Serratore said, but he also emphasized his gentle spirit. He was just a big, lovable kid. Teammates recalled a quiet leader who led by example, someone who would rather deflect praise onto others than accept it himself. He was protective of his friends and his younger brother, Marco, who also played hockey. The pressure on him during his senior year was immense, something few teenagers could comprehend. Every single game was an audition. Every shift was scrutinized by men who held the keys to his future. Yet, by all accounts, he never let it change who he was. He remained the same humble kid from Bemidji. One of the most poignant hidden details of his story is the perspective of the NHL scouts who saw him. They weren't just evaluating a player, they were witnessing a phenomenon. The late Jack Button, a legendary scout, provided one of the most striking quotes about Pelawa, one that captures the almost mythical aura around him. Button said, "When he comes over the boards, he has a presence. The puck follows him around. Some guys have that. You can't teach it." This wasn't just praise. It was an acknowledgement of a rare, innate quality, a hockey charisma that couldn't be quantified. After the draft, the city of Calgary was buzzing with excitement. The local papers were filled with stories about their new prize prospect. Cliff Fletcher, the Flames' GM, couldn't contain his excitement. He told the press, "We never, in our wildest dreams, thought he would be available to us at the 16th pick. He has the potential to be one of the dominant players in the league for the next 15 years." This wasn't the usual post-draft hyperbole. It was a genuine belief that they had found a franchise-altering talent. George had committed to playing college hockey at the University of North Dakota, a powerhouse program just a short drive from Bemidji. The plan was for him to develop there for a year or two before making the jump to the NHL. The Flames were perfectly happy with this plan, content to let their blue-chip prospect mature and dominate at the college level. That summer of 1986 should have been the greatest of his life. He was a local hero, a top NHL draft pick, with a bright future at a top university and a professional career waiting for him. He spent the summer back home in Bemidji, working a construction job, training for the upcoming season, and enjoying the last few months of relative anonymity before his life changed forever. He was just a teenager, on the cusp of everything he had ever dreamed of. The entire hockey world was waiting for him. The story of George Pelawa contains no real controversy in the modern sense of scandals or feuds. Instead, it is centered on a single, tragic event and the haunting, unanswerable questions that have lingered for decades. The debate is not about what he did, but about what he could have become. The central tragic moment occurred on August 30th, 1986, just 10 weeks after the NHL draft. George was driving with his older brother, Marco, and a 16-year-old friend, Kara Ram. They were on their way home from a party. It was a moment of youthful carelessness that would have catastrophic consequences. George lost control of his car on a curve on a county road just outside of Bemidji. The car slid off the road and crashed. Marco Pelawa and Kara Ram sustained serious injuries but survived. George, who was not wearing a seatbelt, was thrown from the vehicle and died at the scene. He was 18 years old. In the aftermath, there was no one to blame, only a profound and overwhelming sense of loss. The debate, if one could call it that, was a quiet, grief-stricken one that played out in the hearts of hockey fans and executives across North America. It revolved around a single, agonizing question. What if? What if he had worn his seatbelt? What if he had taken that curve a little slower? These are the questions that haunt any fatal accident. But in George's case, they were tied to another, larger question. What kind of player would he have been? This is where the historical debate truly lies. Experts were, and still are, divided not on if he would have been a star, but on just how bright that star would have shone. The most common comparison for Pelawa was Cam Neely, the Boston Bruins legend who would go on to define the power forward position and enter the Hockey Hall of Fame. Neely was the prototype, but many scouts at the time believed Pelawa had an even higher ceiling. He was bigger, and some argued he was an even more natural goal scorer at the same age. Some hockey historians believe Pelawa would have been a perennial all-star, a 50-goal scorer who could have single-handedly carried the Flames to multiple Stanley Cups. They envision him as a player who would have dominated the league through the late 80s and 90s, a name spoken in the same breath as Mario Lemieux, Brett Hull, and Jaromir Jagr. A more conservative view suggests that while he certainly would have been a very effective NHL player, the legend might have outgrown the reality. The transition from high school to the NHL is a monumental leap. Some prospects with all the tools in the world struggle to adapt to the speed and intelligence of the professional game. This view posits that he would have been a solid 25 to 30 goal scorer and a valuable physical presence, a very good player, but perhaps not the generational talent some had predicted. The heartbreaking reality is that we will never know. Both arguments are pure speculation, ghosts of a debate about a career that never happened. His story remains frozen in time, a perfect crystal of pure potential, untarnished by the struggles, slumps, or injuries that mark a real NHL career. In a way, his legend is protected by his tragedy. He exists forever as the perfect prospect, the ultimate what-if in hockey history. The death of George Pelawa sent shockwaves through the hockey world, from the small town of Bemidji to the corporate offices of the Calgary Flames. Its consequences were immediate and devastating, and its significance has lingered for decades, serving as a somber touchstone in the sport's history. For the Calgary Flames, it was a franchise tragedy. They had invested their first-round pick and all their hopes for a future power forward in him. Cliff Fletcher, the architect of that great Flames team, would later call Pelawa's death the single greatest disappointment of his long and storied career. The team went on to win the Stanley Cup in 1989, a triumphant moment for the city. But there has always been a quiet footnote to that victory, the thought of how much more dominant they might have been with a 21-year-old George Pelawa in the lineup. His number 27 jersey, which he wore in a rookie camp before his death, was never officially retired, but it carries a heavy weight in the team's history. He is the ghost in their machine, the greatest player they ever had, who never played a single game. For the community of Bemidji, the loss was personal and profound. He wasn't just a prospect, he was one of their own. He was the local boy who made it, the embodiment of their town's pride. His funeral was attended by hundreds, a town united in grief. To this day, his name is spoken with reverence. He remains the gold standard by which all other Bemidji athletes are measured. An annual golf tournament is held in his name to raise money for scholarships, ensuring his legacy is one of giving back to the community he loved. He is Bemidji's mythical hero, a figure of local folklore whose story is passed down from one generation of hockey players to the next. More broadly, George Pelawa's story serves as one of sport's most potent cautionary tales. It is a brutal reminder of the fragility of life and the cruel randomness of fate. Every year, young athletes are drafted into professional leagues, their futures mapped out for them, their potential praised in glowing terms. Pelawa's story is the unspoken fear that underlies all of that hope and celebration. It underscores the fact that potential is not a guarantee. It's a promise, and sometimes those promises are broken before they even have a chance to be kept. In the end, the story of George Pelawa is a tragedy in its purest form. It's not a story about flaws or failings, but about a future that was stolen. He was a young man who had everything: talent, character, a loving family, and the admiration of his community. He stood at the very peak of the mountain of his dreams, looking out at a future that seemed to hold nothing but success and glory. We are left with only fragments, the grainy video of a teenager in a green and white jersey dominating his peers, the breathless scouting reports, the photos of a smiling giant in a Calgary Flames hat, and the heartbreaking memories of those who knew him. He exists in the imagination of hockey fans as a perfect, powerful ghost, forever skating on a sheet of ice in our minds, forever strong, forever young, and forever on the cusp of greatness. And that's all for today's video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll always be in the loop. Thanks for watching.